On April 29, 1986, a 13-year-old girl from Saratoga Springs, New York, vanished without a trace. Decades later, her disappearance remains an unsolved mystery despite extensive investigations, leads, and theories. Today we dive into the chilling details of her story, uncovering facts, exploring the leads, and asking the questions that remain unanswered. I'm Amanda Morgan, and this is New York's Dark Side. Tammie Ann McCormick was born on July 3, 1972, to Nancy Heber and William McCormick. She was the youngest of the family's 6 children. In pictures that I have seen of her, she was a beautiful girl. She had a vibrant smile. She had this long, light brown hair and sparkling hazel eyes. Tammie loved horses. She had a passion for drawing, and she really enjoyed spending time working outside in the garden with her grandmother. The McCormick family would often travel to Florida for spring break, and at the end of summer, they would end it all with a trip to Cape Cod. So really enjoying the outdoor vibes and being together as a family. In 1986, Tammie lived with her family in the Geyser Crest neighborhood of Saratoga Springs, New York. April 29, 1986 was the day that changed everything for the McCormick family. That morning started out as just another routine day. However, after most of the family had either left for work or school, Tammie would tell her older sister Jennifer that she actually had decided that she was going to skip school that day. Jennifer offered to skip with her and spend the day with her, but Tammie told her, nope, just go ahead and go. So Jennifer, suspecting nothing was amiss, went off to start her day, not realizing that this would be the last time that she saw and spoke with her sister. A short time after Jennifer left the house, Tammie also left. And that morning, Tammie had dressed herself in a denim jacket, a yellow striped shirt, worn black corduroy pants, and beige boots. She did have pierced ears, but I couldn't find any information on if she was wearing earrings that day or not. She was later seen carrying a shoulder bag. And I want to point out here that if you dig into this case, you will find some conflicting information in the articles as to Tammie's activities from here. Some articles said that Tammie was planning to hitchhike to school. Others said that she was planning to go to a friend's house. And in an article with News Channel 13's Cold Case 13 report that aired in 2020, investigator Matt Wilson, the lead investigator on Tammie's case, would acknowledge that there are a lot of variations in the timelines and stories relating to Tammie's disappearance, which have made the investigation incredibly difficult. This same episode had an interview with Tammie's sister Jennifer, who said that Tammie had told her that she was planning to skip school that day. Regardless of what Tammie's intentions were for the day, we do know for a fact that Tammie did not arrive for classes that day, nor would there appear to be any confirmation that she arrived at a friend's house. Tammie's mother, Nancy, would later state that she was not initially concerned when Tammie didn't return home that April evening, as she did have a habit of sometimes staying over with a friend's house and not calling to let her parents know until the next morning. So it didn't initially seem to raise any red flags to them. However, when that phone call never came the morning of the 30th, and Tammie still did not arrive at school on the 30th, nor did she return home that evening, her family started to worry about her. And Nancy, Tammie's mother, would file a missing persons report with the Saratoga Springs Police Department. The search for Tammie would be complicated. As police started to conduct interviews with Tammie's friends, they received conflicting stories on whether anyone had seen Tammie on the morning of the 29th. One friend was adamant that she had seen Tammie at the school. Others said that none of them had seen Tammie. She never showed up that day. Police came across rumors that Tammie may have run away during these interviews. And in the months apparently leading up to her disappearance, Tammie had reportedly told several of her friends that she was planning on running away to Jacksonville, Florida. Tammie's mother, Nancy, has always maintained that there was no chance that Tammie had run away that day, since she took none of her belongings with her, and she was wearing her most worn pair of jeans and a pair of boots that she complained gave her blisters on the day that she disappeared. Personally, I find it difficult to believe that a 13-year-old girl, even if they had plans to run away and start completely over somewhere fresh, wouldn't take some of their personal belongings with them. But that's neither here nor there. As they continued their investigations, detectives would track down a friend of Tammie that said that there really truly was a plan for Tammie, along with this friend that was unnamed in the source material, to leave for Jacksonville, Florida on the morning of April 29th. And during the interview, this friend told investigators that she had gone to Tammie's house the night before on the 28th and had slept that night hidden in Tammie's closet until the other members of the family left. And according to this friend, she and Tammie were then planning to hitchhike to Florida, but for some reason, Tammie left the house without her, leaving her alone in the McCormick home. This friend would ultimately find another girl to hitchhike to Florida with, and these two girls did successfully make it down to Florida, where they were later tracked down by the investigators looking for Tammie. But there was no indication that Tammie had been with them during their trip to Florida. The next lead in the case would come from a tip from a motorist after Tammie's disappearance became public knowledge. The tipster reported that on the morning of April 29th, he had picked up a young girl matching Tammie's description. He told police that he dropped her off on Route 19 near Saratoga Lake. As police continued to talk to Tammie's friends, they would realize that many of these friends were hesitant to give a lot of details regarding Tammie's movements in the days before her disappearance, because they were actually afraid of getting themselves into trouble with law enforcement. Investigators would eventually uncover that Tammie, along with many of her friends, were hanging out with a much older crowd. And the name Arthur Mason Slaybaugh II would come up. Slaybaugh, who went by his middle name Mason, became a person of interest in Tammie's disappearance from the very beginning. At the time of Tammie's disappearance, Slaybaugh was 26 years old. He was working as a corrections officer at Mount McGregor Correctional Facility in Wilton, New York. Slaybaugh had a reputation for having young girls at his house, where they would party and consume alcohol. In 1986, Slaybaugh lived in a small house on Saratoga Lake, near where Tammie had reportedly been dropped off by that motorist. And one article I read reported that Tammie had another connection to Slaybaugh outside of the parties, as Tammie would babysit for Slaybaugh's girlfriend, who had a young child. And during the course of following this lead, police also uncovered that Slaybaugh's girlfriend had reportedly left town on April 29th and traveled to Jacksonville, Florida. This was a strange coincidence that she left the day that Tammie disappeared and went to the same location that Tammie's friends hitchhiked to and alleged that Tammie had been planning on traveling to. Unfortunately, at the time, this was about all the information that they had tying Slaybaugh to Tammie's disappearance, which was not really enough to file charges or prove anything. So here's where it kind of sat for a bit. One potential other suspect in Tammie's disappearance would come onto law enforcement's radar in the mid-1990s with the arrest of Lewis Stephen Lent Jr. And I'm going to save the deep dive on him for another episode, but in case you are not familiar with him, here's a bit of an overview. On January 7th, 1994, Lewis Lent attempted to abduct a 12-year-old girl named Rebecca at gunpoint in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Rebecca was incredibly smart. She was incredibly badass, in my opinion. She had known as soon as this was going on that she had to get away from this asshole at all costs. So Rebecca faked an asthma attack. She didn't have asthma, and she just pretended that she couldn't breathe. And I can, in all honesty, say that I don't believe I would have had the wits about me to think of trying this had I been Rebecca. Thankfully for her, this tactic worked. Lent became very confused as she was trying to sit down and was pretending to hyperventilate. So he grabbed her backpack, which she just quickly pulled herself out of and ran down the street to where another man was shoveling snow. And he took her into the bank and called law enforcement. And Lewis Lent was later found and arrested for the incident and would be convicted of several charges relating to that attempted abduction. During their initial interrogations of Lewis Lent, he would confess to the murder of 12-year-old Jimmy Bernardo, who he abducted in October of 1990 from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, whose body was later found in Newfield, New York. He also confessed to the abduction of 12-year-old Sarah Ann Wood of Frankfort, New York, who he abducted in August of 1993 while she was riding her bike from the church where her father served as pastor. Sarah's body has unfortunately never been found, though there have been searches across multiple states over the years. Lewis Lent has been named a potential suspect in Tammie's case, as well as a few other unsolved missing persons cases around New York and other states as well. He has been reluctant to tell law enforcement where Sarah's body is, and it's believed that this is because there are remains of other victims in the area that he hasn't confessed to. Lewis Lent is now in his 70s, and he's currently serving life in prison for the murder of Jimmy Bernardo in a Massachusetts state prison. But law enforcement from New York does maintain regular contact with him, continuing to try to find closure for the Wood family and potentially some other families as well. In 2011, investigators started to take a closer look at Tammie's disappearance. They believe that Tammie was likely murdered on the day that she disappeared, and at this time, investigators formally named a person of interest. This man was former corrections officer Arthur Mason Slaybaugh II, who I mentioned earlier. By this point, unfortunately, they wouldn't be able to interrogate Slaybaugh again, as he was now deceased, having died of a heart attack in January of 2001. Investigators started to take a harder look at Slaybaugh when witnesses began to come forward after he passed away, stating that they had been too afraid to speak up while he was still alive. These witnesses were both friends of Slaybaugh and one of his former girlfriends, though I can't say for sure if this was the same girlfriend who had left for Florida the day that Tammie went missing. Based on these tips, investigators believe it was even more likely that Tammie was on her way to his house on Browns Beach near Saratoga Lake that April morning. There have been several searches conducted looking for evidence of Tammie or her remains. The most recent search took place in November of 2017 when a field property owned by Kenneth Slaybaugh, the brother of Arthur Mason Slaybaugh, was searched on Route 30 in Northampton, part of Fulton County in New York. The search focused on a trash pile on the property where neighbors would say that Mason and Kenneth would bury all kinds of things at all hours of the night. Unfortunately, investigators found no sign of Tammie with this search. Even more unfortunate is that this is where the case seems to stand. But maybe there is somebody out there who has a piece of information that could bring an end to the questions that surround Tammie's disappearance. This case intrigues me. I have so many questions, and one of them did involve a little bit of a rabbit hole that I want to share, which has since been debunked. But while researching, I did find one interesting theory on Reddit. And of course, due to the source, you can take this as you will. But I'm including it here because, quite honestly, I had a similar thought when I was recording a prior episode. And there's just some other interesting things about it that I'll get to in a minute. A poster using the username KK6NJ posted in the Grateful Doe Reddit thread a theory that Tammie may be the Rails to Trails Jane Doe found in Portland, New York in September of 2021. And I covered the Rails to Trails Jane Doe information in episode 2, covering the disappearance of Corey Anderson, Marquita Mull, and Patricia Lamerhurt. So if you haven't listened to that episode, I would urge you to take a listen once you finish this episode, because there are some other yet unsolved cases that I would love to get more attention on. To recap the Rails to Trails Jane Doe, on September 26, 2021, a woman was walking on the Rails to Trails path in Portland, New York, off of Woolben Road, when she spotted what she thought was a skull near the head of the trail. Police were called, investigators were dispatched to the area, and they found additional human remains near the skull that appeared to have been in the area for decades. They also, at the same time, located a second set of human remains in the area, and those remains were later identified as belonging to 50-year-old Marquita Mull. Since dropping that episode, charges have been brought forth in the Marquita Mull case. 62-year-old Richard Fox of Buffalo was charged with Marquita's murder in January of 2025. At the point where I was researching this, the second set of remains was a still unidentified doe, and she was found wearing a yellow and white striped shirt branded as Jack and Coco, sized 18 to 20. And the information on the Jane Doe's post listed that shirt as being sold in the 1990s. Tammie went missing in 1986. However, the poster shared some research that they had done, diving into some legal depositions for the Jack and Coco company that sold the shirt, that could implicate that the shirt was actually for sale much earlier than the 1990s, which means that it could have been the brand of shirt that Tammie was wearing. The user had shared this information with law enforcement, and when I came across the post, I also shared it with law enforcement. I did get a response back from investigator Matt Wilson that Tammie had been ruled out as the Rails to Trails Jane Doe. And while this lead didn't pan out to be Tammie, I bring it up because it was an impressive amount of armchair sleuthing by the poster that you never know. It could have been the break needed to solve this case. However, as it turns out, this Jane Doe would get her name back, thankfully, and that was because of DNA. In February of this year, 2025, the Rails to Trails Jane Doe was identified as Cassandra Watson. Cassandra was last seen alive in Buffalo in 2003 or 2004. She was around 40 years old at the time of her disappearance. Richard Fox, the alleged murderer of Marquita Mull, as who we discussed in episode 32, now also faces charges for the death of Cassandra. Cassandra was in a relationship with Fox at the time of her disappearance, and she was living with him in a residence in Buffalo. Both Cassandra and Marquita are believed to have been strangled by Fox. Authorities are also looking at Fox for other unsolved cases, so there may be more information on that coming. Tammie was only 13 on that April 1986 morning when she vanished without a trace. She had long, light brown hair with hazel eyes. One piece of identifying information I don't believe I mentioned earlier is that she had either a homemade tattoo or a scar with her initials TAM on her upper left arm. Her ears are pierced. She was last seen wearing a denim jacket, a yellow striped shirt, worn black corduroy pants, beige boots, and was carrying a shoulder bag. If you have any information on the disappearance of Tammie Ann McCormick, please call the Saratoga Springs Police Department at 518-584-1800. If you haven't already, please follow the show on your favorite podcast platform and consider leaving a rating or review. It really helps get these stories out to more listeners. You can find all the sources for this episode at our website, nydarksidepodcast.com, and join the discussion on our Facebook or Instagram page. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, some shadows in New York never fade.